Before we start today's lesson, you will need a pen, some paper and exercise book, and unless you're viewing this video on a mobile phone, turn off all mobile phones and remove any distractions. In today's lesson, we will look at the process of aerobic respiration. We are continuing with our topic question of how do living things breathe and respire to stay alive, and specifically today we will look at aerobic respiration. But before we begin, let's have a quick starter and let's see if you can remember the gas that we breathe in and the gas that we breathe out. 30 seconds, off we go. Did we remember then? So the gas that we breathe in and use in our bodies is oxygen, and the gas that we produce and breathe out is carbon dioxide. So before we start looking at respiration, I'd just like to go over a few things that we did in a previous lesson. So first of all, we need to remember the structure of the lungs, and we need to remember that when we breathe in, that the intercostal muscles that are between the ribs contract and they cause the rib cage to rise. Also, the diaphragm, which is another muscle, will contract, and both of those things together cause the volume of the chest to increase. This means that the pressure falls and air comes in via our trachea and then into the bronchi. The bronchi split off into bronchioles and then they further divide into alveoli. Once the oxygen has got to the alveoli, then it will be transferred to the blood and pumped around the body using the heart. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly show you an animation of what happens when we breathe. Let's just take a minute to remind ourselves then of what happens when we breathe. So when we breathe, air travels down the windpipe and into our lungs. The rib cage would move up and out and the diaphragm moves down. The way that this occurs is that the intercostal muscles between the ribs contract. That causes the ribs to move up and out. The diaphragm will also contract and pull down. A combination of both of these things then causes the volume of the chest cavity to increase, and that causes a drop in pressure. To increase the pressure, the lungs fill with air. So on top of breathing, I would also like to take this opportunity just to remind ourselves from last lesson when we looked at diffusion, and the definition of diffusion was the net movement of particles from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. We're now going to watch a short video that shows us this process of diffusion happening in the alveoli and also outlines how the alveoli are adapted to make this more efficient.
The alveoli are the site of gas exchange in the lungs, and they're located here at the very end of the bronchioles. They have a structure that's something like this. We often describe it as having a sort of cauliflower shape, but basically they're just tiny little air sacs at the end of the bronchioles. If we see it here represented in more of a diagram format, we can see what's going on. First of all, oxygen and carbon dioxide are constantly being supplied and removed through breathing. Let's look a little bit closer at the lining here. Notice that it's only one cell thick. Oxygen can diffuse across the cell membrane of the cell that lines the alveolus. From there, it can obviously diffuse across to outside of that cell. The same thing applies for the lining of the blood capillary until eventually it diffuses into the red blood cell where it can bind with hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin. Similarly, carbon dioxide can also diffuse across these cell membranes and reach the alveolar sac to then exit the body. Now then, oxygen, as we've already said, is constantly being supplied through breathing, but it's also being taken away from this area because of the blood flow. What this means is that we are constantly maintaining a concentration gradient, which is what allows this transfer of gas, this gas exchange, to continue. There are some important features of the gas exchange surface that you need to know. First of all, it's got a large surface area, which is provided by this particular shape of the alveoli, and also by the fact that there are lots and lots and lots of them inside of the lungs. It's very thin, which provides a short diffusion pathway. Notice that the lining is only 1 cell thick. It's also got a moist lining. The inside of each alveolar sac is moist, which allows gases to dissolve, which then allows them to diffuse across the lining. It's got a very good blood supply. Each one of the alveoli has lots and lots of blood capillaries surrounding it. If we have a little look at what lung tissue looks like under a microscope, we can see this sort of zigzag, crisscross sort of mesh of little almost streams. This is the capillary network, and we can tell that because if we look at one of these individual little red splotches here, those are individual red blood cells. Finally, there is very good ventilation, and that basically just means there's a really good supply of air, which is supplied through breathing. A little bit of exam help on this. You might get asked to describe the features of the lungs that make gas exchange efficient. Well, the exchange surface has a large surface area, and that's provided by the large number of alveoli, and the surface is only 1 cell thick. Remember that provides a very short diffusion pathway. And it is supplied with blood by a very dense capillary network. So there, you're easily going to get those 3 marks.
Okay then, so just picking up on a few things from the video then. So the air will go in and out via the alveoli. When the air gets into the alveoli, they are 1 cell thick, and they are next to capillaries which are also 1 cell thick. There are lots and lots of these capillaries in and around the alveoli. This helps for really efficient diffusion of the oxygen from the alveoli and into the blood and to the red blood cells. Once the oxygen is attached to the red blood cells, then the red blood cells will carry the oxygen all round the body. The gas that we produce then and that we need to exhale is dissolved in the blood, and this will also diffuse from the blood, but this time back into the alveoli. So you've got oxygen diffusing from the alveoli into the blood and attaching to the red blood cells, and you have carbon dioxide diffusing from the blood and into the alveoli. We have millions of alveoli in our lungs, and if we were to lay them all out flat, then the surface of your lung would cover half a tennis court. I think that's quite incredible. Okay then, I'd now like you to just record 3 ways in which alveoli are adapted to be good at gas exchange. 2 minutes. What 3 ways did you get then? So they have a large surface area. We've said if we spread them all out flat, there will be half the size of a tennis court. They have a really good blood supply. You could have mentioned the capillaries there and said that they've got lots and lots of capillaries around them for that blood supply. They are moist, and that helps with the dissolving of the gases and the diffusion. And they are only 1 cell thick, so that makes the diffusion much more efficient. But now we've looked at how oxygen gets into our body, why do we actually need it? Well, the body needs a constant supply of energy, and we get that from our digestive food, particularly glucose from the digestion of carbohydrates is a really important substance that contains lots of stored chemical energy. When glucose reacts with oxygen, a lot of energy is released. And in the body's cells, glucose and oxygen will react together to produce and release this energy. The release of energy from glucose is called respiration. But what is respiration? Well, respiration is glucose and oxygen reacting together to form carbon dioxide and water, and during that process they will also release energy. So the glucose comes from the digestive system and from the food that we eat, and particularly carbohydrates. Oxygen comes from breathing in, and then the carbon dioxide and water are both waste products, and both of these will be exhaled. That's the process of breathing out. And the equation itself produces this really useful energy. Now, this type of respiration is called aerobic respiration because it uses air. And this type of aerobic respiration, energy is released when we react glucose with oxygen. If we remember back to a couple of lessons, we looked at the different percentages of air that we inhale, that we breathe in, compared to the air that we exhale, that's breathe out. And we can see that the nitrogen stays exactly the same. Our bodies don't use nitrogen, but 78% of the air around us is nitrogen. So we just inhale that and exhale that, and nothing happens to that. However, you can see that the oxygen, we will breathe in 21% of the air that we breathe in is oxygen, and only 17% of the air that we breathe out is oxygen. So 4% of the oxygen that we breathe in, that we inhale, is used in the process of respiration. Carbon dioxide, we inhale very small amounts of carbon dioxide. The air around us is about 0.04%, but the carbon dioxide that we breathe out, much higher percentage, that's about 4%. And as we've just seen, that process of respiration produces carbon dioxide, and the way that we get rid of that is that we exhale it. Okay, let's take a pause. There's 6 questions there, and see how much you can remember from what we've done so far. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'd like you to either write out the question with the answer or complete your answer in full sentences. 5 minutes, off you go. how did you get on then? Let's have a look. So the word equation for respiration is oxygen plus glucose going to carbon dioxide plus water. The process of breathing in is inhalation, and the gas that we need to breathe in is oxygen. The process of breathing out is exhalation, and the gas that we need to breathe out is carbon dioxide. And finally, the glucose in the equation comes from digested food, and particularly carbohydrates. Why is respiration so important? We know that it produces this energy, and that's the useful part, but why do we need energy? Well, we need energy to do practically anything. Even sleeping takes energy. We also need it to make new things like body cells or hair. We need it to grow. We need energy to move. We need energy to breathe. And where does respiration happen then? Well, if we need energy to grow, every living thing must respire. But where does respiration take place? Well, here you'll remember this from way back in year 7. We've got an animal cell and a plant cell. And the things down the middle, the nucleus, the cytoplasm, the cell membrane and the mitochondria, are all parts which are common in both plant cells and animal cells. So if everything needs to respire, then respiration must take place in one of these. Well, if you remember, the nucleus is what contains all the genetic information that allows the cell to reproduce. The cytoplasm is where chemical reactions take place, and the cell membrane is what controls what goes in and out of the cell. But the mitochondria are specifically for respiration. So respiration will take place in the mitochondria of the cell. And both plant and animal cells have mitochondria, so they both respire. Okay then. So if we look at the picture, you'll see lots of sentences there that all have the word respiration in them. And it's really important that we use respiration in the right way. So I would like you to just take a minute to read all of them and tell me which of the statements are close to the truth and which are wrong. Okay then, how did we get on? So, respiration is the scientific way of saying breathing. That's not correct. We inhale and we exhale. That's the scientific word. Respiration is not breathing. Okay, the next one, animals respire and plants photosynthesize. Well, again, we know that is incorrect because plants also need energy and plants will grow, so plants also need respiration. Respiration is a way of producing energy. That's true. And respiration is a chemical reaction that releases energy. That is absolutely correct, and that would be our perfect answer. Okay, that's all for today's lesson. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again next time.